Back in 1932 in Ukraine, Soviet Union, something happened that would change everything. It began in fields that had fed generations. By the autumn of 1932, the countryside around Odessa, Kharkiv, and the scattered hamlets of the Ukrainian steppe looked quiet. But under that quiet was a policy being enforced with iron precision. The Soviet leadership, driven by Joseph Stalin's drive for rapid industrialization and political control, had pushed collectivization for years. Peasants were labeled kulaks, their land seized, grain requisitioned. Those requisitions were not mere rounding errors. They were impossible quotas, designed to extract the harvest itself. As winter came, carts rolled away with last year's flour. Party commissars and armed brigades moved through villages, inventorying barns, seizing seed grain, listing names in ledger books. Villages that failed to meet quotas were blacklisted, deliveries cut, markets closed, all trade prohibited. Border patrols and interior passports kept starving families from fleeing. The state press demanded production, while the machine of repression punished those who could not comply. Reports slipped out. Smuggled notes, eyewitness dispatches, the quiet interviews of a British reporter named Gareth Jones. He returned to Europe with stories of entire districts reduced to skeletal shapes, children dragging themselves along roads, mothers swapping bread for boots. Across the ocean, other voices denied what he heard. A powerful narrative, shaped by politics and expediency, insisted that there was no famine, or if there was, it was a local failure rather than a consequence of central policy. That denial was part of the horror. While peasants starved, the Soviet apparatus kept exporting grain to pay for industrial equipment. Officials falsified harvest figures. Regional leaders who could not produce were replaced or executed. The result was a grinding, systematic removal of food from the mouths of a people the state deemed inconvenient or disloyal. The human toll is staggering and intimate by turns. Entire families sleeping in sheds to hide from requisition teams, mothers boiling leather, roots, even the inedible. Neighbors turned upon neighbors as accusations of hoarding were used to seize what little remained. Reports of cannibalism, hushed, corroborated by some observers, became one of the grim measures of how deep the collapse had become. Mass graves were dug in fields once green. Scholars today estimate the death toll in Ukraine from the famine of 1932-33 at between 3 and 7 million. And here the conspiracy becomes clear. It was not merely incompetence. Policy choices, exorbitant grain quotas, the militarized enforcement of collectivization, blacklisting entire districts, restrictions on movement, and continuing grain exports formed an intentional apparatus that punished Ukraine's peasantry and nationalistic currents. Cultural leaders, priests, and intelligentsia who resisted were arrested or silenced. The famine functioned as both punishment and deterrent, a brutal lesson delivered by the state. Yet for years, much of the world was uncertain or misled. Western correspondents were divided. Some, seeking access or seduced by ideology, parroted Soviet denials. The Soviet government tightly controlled information, expelled or intimidated critics, and staged facades of normalcy. That cover-up, official, diplomatic, and journalistic, extended the agony, denying international help and obscuring responsibility. In villages, the memory of those months did not fade. Stories passed from parent to child. The child who starved to death beside a threshing floor, the grandmother who traded her wedding ring for a bowl of porridge, the teacher who vanished after speaking too plainly. Decades later, Ukraine would name those months Holodomor, death by hunger, and demand the truth. This is a true life horror, not born of myth, but of policy and human choice. The conspiracy was not whispered in backrooms alone. It was written in decrees, in quotas, and in the ledger books of the commissars. It was sustained by denial abroad and secrecy at home. Remembering matters. To read the faded lists of victims, to hear the old voices still trembling with what they saw, is to understand how modern power can turn appetite into a weapon. The fields grew green again, but the silence of those years stayed, an accusation to later generations that hunger, when organized, becomes one of history's most terrible crimes.